Hello, Wellspring. So we're making another rather large jump in our readings. Today's March 6th, and we're going to be jumping from Joshua chapter 6 that we just wrapped up yesterday, all the way to towards the end of the book. We're going to jump into Joshua chapter 23, um, and you'll kind of get why this first verse in this chapter is going to tell you kind of the very short version of what happens in in the 17 chapters that we're in between. um, Remember, we're trying to get through the entire scripture in 1 year, and we're highlighting individual chapters. So rather than reading 10, 11, 12 chapters in a day or in a sitting to get through the whole of scripture, we're trying to hit maybe what we might consider like a highlight passage to get the main story, the main thrust, the main flow and feel of what's happening in each of these books and what's happening throughout scripture. So with that in mind, we're making a big jump today. We'll be on Joshua 23 today and Joshua 24 tomorrow. And then we will move into the book of Judges, which is another interesting book with a number of tough stories that talks about Israel's journey uh, after the time of Joshua. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's dive into Joshua 23. I'm in the NIV. And so here we go. After a long time had passed, and the Lord had given Israel rest from all of their enemies around them, Joshua, by then a very old man, summoned all of Israel, their elders, leaders, judges, and officials. And he said to them, I am very old. You yourselves have seen everything the Lord your God has done to all these nations for your sake. It was the Lord your God who fought for you. Remember how I have allotted as an inheritance for your tribes all the land of the nations that remain, the nations I conquered between the Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea in the west. The Lord your God himself will push them out for your sake. He will drive them out before you, and you will take possession of their land, as the Lord your God promised. Be very strong. Be careful to obey all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, without turning aside to the right or to the left. Do not associate with those nations that remain among you. Do not invoke the names of their gods or swear by them. You must not serve them or bow down to them. But you are to hold fast to the Lord your God as you have until now. The Lord has driven out before you great and powerful nations. To this day, no one has been able to withstand you. One of you routs 1,000 because the Lord your God fights for you, just as he promised. So be very careful to love the Lord your God. But if you turn away and ally yourselves with the survivors of these nations that remain among you, and if you intermarry with them and associate with them, then you may be sure the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations before you. Instead, they will become snares and traps for you, whips on your back and thorns in your eyes, until you perish from this good land which the Lord your God has given you. Now, I am about to go the way of all the earth. You know with all your heart and soul that not one of all the good promises the Lord your God gave you has failed. Every promise has been fulfilled. Not one has failed. But just as all the good things the Lord your God has promised you have come to you, so he will bring on you all the evil things he has threatened, until the Lord your God has destroyed you from this good land that he has given you. If you violate the covenant of the Lord your God, which he commanded you, and go and serve other gods and bow down to them, the Lord's anger will burn against you, and you will quickly perish from the good land he has given you. So once again, we're wrestling with a reminder that God is holy, that if we honor him, he blesses it. And if we dishonor him, there is a cost for violating his holiness. And, I've said this a number of times, we're thankful that Jesus covers us. But here we also recognize there are natural consequences for some negative decisions, negative actions. The thing that jumps out to me in this space is just Joshua again reminding them, be strong, be courageous. God is going to fulfill his promises. They've been driving out the nations of Israel. I mean, the nations that were in the promised land. But Joshua is saying God is still going to continue to fulfill that promise. And that's still happening. And I think sometimes we can expect that God's promises have to be fulfilled in a way or space that we anticipate them being fulfilled, right? And so I think there's a situation here where we see Joshua um, at the end of this chapter says God has never failed. Every promise has been fulfilled. Not one thing has he failed in. And yet, he's also saying there's still nations to drive out. And so here I am, Joshua, the leader after Moses, who's been called by God to usher Israel into the promised land. I've taken you in, and now I'm very old. I'm on the edge of death. And there's still people that need to be driven out. God's promise is still being fulfilled, right? And so we can get lost in this idea that God's promises have to be fulfilled in our timing or in the way in which we think they should. But God is not tied to our lifespan. God is not tied to some time frame that we put him in or that we experience. God is outside of that. And so Joshua recognizes God has fulfilled his promises. God is fulfilling his promises. God will fulfill his promises. Whether that happens in my lifetime or not, completely, if it comes to fruition or completion in my lifetime or not, I recognize God's faithfulness. And so Joshua is an example of this to all of the people. God has given them some of the land. They've driven out some of the nations. They are driving out some of the nations. They will drive out some of the other nations. And yet, Joshua says, God has not failed. God has been good. God is faithful. And so I just want to remind you, if you're in the middle of the waiting, if you're in the middle of the journey, if you feel like the promise hasn't been fulfilled in a timely manner in your life, or the things that you're hoping to experience or know hasn't occurred in the time frame of which you desire, remember that God's ways are beyond our ways. God is in it for the long game, and we can trust him. And just because we haven't seen it happen exactly how we wanted to or within the time frame we wanted to doesn't mean that God has failed. Remember, his ways are beyond ours. His wisdom is beyond ours. Press in, lean in, trust him even in the mystery. Trust him even in the waiting. God bless you, Wellspring. Have a wonderful day.